YouTube channel, Homoeopathy Super Sessions by Dr. Jagos. Today I'll be doing the chapter from J. Allen, the relationship of miasms to abnormal growths. Miasms bears a relationship to all acute and chronic diseases. So all acute and chronic diseases are miasmatic based, or they have a relationship with the miasm. It also bears a relationship to all the functions and structural pathology. So all functional and all structural pathology can be correlated with the miasm. As the functional changes go on increasing, they become pathological in nature. That is a perverted function or the physiological stress. So as initially the disease will be there in the functional level, and as it goes on increasing or the patient doesn't take any medicine and it goes on increasing, the functional changes will then directly change into or slowly change into the pathological state, or they become pathological in nature. To which J.H. Allen said, pathological nature is the perverted function of the organism, or it is the physiological stress. So the physiology of the body is under stress, as a result of which the different diseases are there. Life is dynamic, and so are the functions of the brain. So he's compared life, the dynamicity of life, to the function of the brain. We can see the dynamicity in the power of speech and action of the mind. So with the function of the brain, he said that we can see the dynamic function of the brain in the power of speech and action of the mind. Hence, all these potentials are invisible, which combines with the miasmatic potentials of life. So all this is invisible and it has a miasmatic correlation. All the actions on the earth are having innumerable potential forces. So all the actions on the earth, they're having these different or innumerable potential forces. Now these forces can be seen the action of growth by sunlight, heat and moisture upon life, etc. Thus, without the potential, life would not exist. So basically, life is a flow, life is dynamic in nature, it has a potential, and without that, life would not exist. Thus, we see that all actual existence was first a potential existence. So whatever is living on this earth, it has a potential existence. Thus, in all pathological expressions, we are dealing with the potential in the living organism. That means whatever pathological expressions are there, we are dealing it because of the potential present in the living organisms. The expressions from the functional level become pathological. In medicine, it is power of action on the miasm of the life force. So the potential with respect to medicine is the action of the miasm on the life force. Thus, all functional and pathological changes occur in the disease due to the potential of the miasm. So whatever functional or pathological states are there, or whatever expressions are there, either functional or pathological in a disease, it is because of the capability or the potentiality of the miasm. Therefore, constructive and destructive forces are at work, especially when the syphilitic miasm is present. So this says the potential becomes constructive when in health and destructive when the syphilitic miasm is present. The syphilitic miasm gradually increases in strength and intoxicates the organism. So when the syphilitic miasm is present in the body, it will gradually increase in strength and it will take over the organism as if it is intoxicated. Soon we see the beginning of false processes and multiple false expressions both within and without the body. We see false structures like neoplasms which arise out of healthy tissue. So what are these false structures? They are neoplasms which arise out of healthy tissue. Thus, it will be easy for us to combat the visible enemy. So if you see the neoplasm arising, it will be easy for us or easy for the physician to combat the disease or the enemy. The enemy is the disease. But when the power is invisible, dynamic manifestation of syphilis confronts us, we are at a loss to understand its multiple manifestations and processes. But however, when the dynamic power of the syphilitic miasm is invisible, as dynamic power in itself is invisible, we find it difficult to understand the manifestations of the syphilitic miasm. Therefore, we have to be acquainted with the dynamics of the miasm. So, therefore, we have to know the symptoms exhibited by each miasm. We have to study the progression of the syphilitic miasm. So, we have to see the origin, the duration, and the progress of the syphilitic miasm. From the destructive cell infiltration to its ulcers and necrotic debris. So, initially, it may have, excuse me, it may cause destruction, then cell infiltration, ulcers, and ultimately leading to the necrotic debris. Or destruction and degeneration is the final outcome of the syphilitic miasm. So it takes around 15 to 50 days to express itself. The force potential is seen in the intoxication of the system, or the first sign is seen when the system becomes intoxicated. The second potential is seen in the glandular involvement and the secondary external or skin eruptions and the mucous ulcers. So the second potential is seen, or the second expressions are seen because of the glandular involvement, or the glands are affected, or you get secondary symptoms which are external, especially of the skin or mucous ulcers, skin eruptions or mucous ulcers. And the third potential is seen by manifestation of latent psora, which gets aroused into activity. And the third potential is that the latent psora, which lies quiescent in the body, is aroused into activity. This action is intensified and it magnifies the action of both the miasms. So what happens? The latent psora in the third potential, it gets activated, as a result of which the latent psora gets activated, as well as the original syphilitic miasm also becomes more accentuated. Thus, the life force gets more weakened and death may ensue. So what happens? The life force is already weakened with the syphilitic miasm. In the third potential, on the third stage, the latent psora gets aggravated. This forms a burden on the life force, and the life force gets more weakened and death may ensue. Thus, the main object is to relieve the organism of the dual action of the miasm. So, what is our main object? We have to relieve the person or the organism of the dual action of the miasm. The internal disease process now becomes active. The natural evolution process now soon becomes an external disease. So what happens? The internal process, it becomes active, or whatever changes are taking place in the internal economy of the patient, they are roused into activity and they are very active. And the natural evolution is that it soon becomes an external disease, because the internal disease may threaten life. The body tries to self-preserve itself by throwing it out on some non-important external manifestation on the body. Therefore, they say the natural evolution process now soon becomes an external disease. The natural process like that of the kidney or the skin become accelerated in their action. So you will see the action on the kidney or the skin. This will result in excessive sweating or a diarrhea may result, which in turn quieting the internal turmoil of the organism. So whenever such a natural evolution process occurs on the non-important part of the body, or by elimination through the organs like the kidney, the toxins will get eliminated. So therefore, you may have excess sweating or diarrhea, and as a result of which the internal turmoil of the organism is quieted. Thus, it becomes safer for the organism to be relieved by some superficial pathological lesion rather than through a physiological eliminative process, which in that time may become pathological. So Dr. G. Allen says that it is better that the person or the organism becomes relieved by some superficial pathological lesion. So a skin lesion or a skin discharge will be useful in relieving the complaints, rather than a physiological eliminative process, which may at the time become pathological. So rather than a physiological elimination, which will be there, but many a times it becomes pathological. So that will not suffice, or that will not solve the problem of quietening the internal turmoil of the organs. We must always take into account the dynamic process of the disease. We must correlate the miasm with the disease process, as you told previously also. Thus, to a homeopath, a tumor or any abnormal growth is a result of the miasmatic action. So, since we believe in the dynamic nature of the disease and the miasms, which are responsible for the disease, both acute and chronic, whenever a tumor or an abnormal growth is there, to a homeopath, it is because of its miasmatic action. The miasms have changed the whole physical, mental, moral, and spiritual nature of man. So the miasms, so the body is under the influence of the miasm. The miasm has many tentacles. It is spread over all over the body on the physical, mental, moral, and spiritual nature of man. Let us now notice the dual action of the life force. So the dual action of the life force is what? In health, it is endowed with creative power. So in health, it helps to maintain homeostasis in the body. When we add the destructive action of one of the miasm, it becomes dual in action. So the dual action will start when the miasm is present in the body. So in health, the miasm is in a quietened stage. In the disease condition, it gets roused into activity, and the destructive action of the syphilitic miasm comes into play, or whatever miasm is there in the body. So the life force tries to maintain equilibrium. So even though it is under the destructive action of one of the miasms, the miasm initially, the life force initially will try to maintain equilibrium. So when the equilibrium is disturbed, the disease sets in. So how long will the life force maintain equilibrium? As long as the life force is strong enough to avoid the noxious influence. That is the noxious influence of the miasm. But when the adaptability is lost, naturally the life force becomes weakened and the disease sets in. The pathological states are produced giving rise to subjective or objective actions. So therefore we get pathological states and which are seen through either subjective or objective actions or symptoms of the patient. The life force is being perverted by the miasms, and the phenomena of appearance is not the primary cause. So what happens? The life force becomes deviated, or it becomes perverted, or it becomes bad, or it becomes unhealthy by the miasmatic influence, and the phenomena of appearance is not the primary cause. Rather, it is the invisible Psora or some other miasmal influence upon the life force. So again, it reminds you that it is the invisible Psora or the latent Psora which gets raised into activity. The disposition of the patient will help us to identify the actual miasm when we cannot locate or name the existing miasm. So at times it becomes difficult to locate or to name the existing miasm. So for that, Dr. J.H. Allen says that the disposition of the patient will help us to actually identify the actual miasm. That is, the disposition will be the physical makeup of the patient, the symptom, the mental level, the symptom on the physical level. That is the disposition of the patient. So for that, you have to know the symptoms of the miasm or the dynamic symptom of the miasm. The application of the law of similar is the true method of curing disease which has reached the pathological state. So again, it reminds you over and over again in all these chapters that we have to apply the law of similars if you want to cure the disease which has reached a pathological state in its correct form. What pathology we are seeing in the disease is the real dynamic one only. So again, it reminds you that pathology is also dynamic because this is dynamic, even life is dynamic, even the miasms are dynamic. So everything revolves around the dynamic nature of the disease. In the beginning of action of the miasm on the organism, we see only the latent condition. So what happens initially when the action of the miasm is there on the organism, it is in the latent condition or it is in the inactive condition. We see this through red flags of distress by some pain or mild sensation. But when the latent condition is roused, then some red flags of distress are coming up in the patient in the forms of a pain or some mild uncomfortable sensation followed by epilepsy or spasm when the center is disturbed profoundly. So you may get epilepsy, you may get spasm, you may get degeneration, you may get intoxication, etc., especially when the center is disturbed, that is when the life force is disturbed. All movements are governed by fixed laws, thus the life force is governed by the law of the universe too. So all the movements in the universe are governed by fixed laws, and so is the life force also. The recognition of the result of the dynamic action of the life force is one of the important points that departs from the old school. So old school always believed, as you all know, in the materialistic point of view. They never looked into the dynamic nature of the disease. So this was the shift wherein homeopathic school recognized the dynamic action of the life force, whereas the old school never saw beyond the materialistic aspect of the disease. Now let us turn our attention to the study of the abnormal growths. No abnormal growth can be formed without the work of the life force. So without the perversion of the life force, no abnormal growths can be formed. A healthy life force will not tend to produce abnormal growth. So a healthy life force will maintain health. A diseased life force will produce disease or an abnormal growth. It is only when the life force gets disturbed, the abnormal growth will form. Thus, cause may be suppression of a discharge, injury to a part, suppression of disease states such as eruptive disease, pain, ulcerations, or any marked disease process. So, whenever the life force gets disturbed, abnormal growths will be formed or they will develop because of suppression of a discharge. So the causes are what? Either suppression of a discharge, injury to any part, or suppression of the disease state, such as eruptive disease, suppression of pain, ulceration, or any other such disease process. Also, any stasis of disease or any metastatic suppression may produce an abnormal growth. He further says that whenever there's a stagnation of the disease or stasis of the disease or metastatic suppression, that when suppression has taken place, the disease travels from one place to another, or it travels from the superficial level to the deeper level. Therefore, any metastatic suppression may produce an abnormal growth. Thus, the physician must recognize the abnormal growths as a defense mechanism of the life force to subdue the internal turmoil and thus preserve life. As in the last video also, I've told you the same view of Dr. J.H. Allen is that the abnormal growths are just a defense mechanism to save the life of the individual or to subdue the internal turmoil of the body. If the physician does not recognize it, he will cause profound suppression with deeper new manifestation of the disease. So if the physician doesn't recognize the internal turmoil is because of the miasm and he will further suppress it, then what will happen? He will cause the disease to go deeper and deeper, or new symptoms of suppression will develop into the organism. The best thing is to take the totality and cure the patient. Dr. J.H. Allen says the best thing is to go according to the law of similars, take the totality based on the law of similars and give the similar. We must take into consideration the present existing totality which uncovers the miasmatic cause. So he says that for that we have to take the pre-existing totality or whatever dominant totality is there or whatever present existing totality is there which covers the miasm or which covers the miasmatic cause must be taken. We must also take into account the new totality which the exhibit of suppression is removed by return of the old symptoms. So not only take the present existing totality, but also take the new totality after suppression and the return of the old symptoms. In this way, we have identified the primary simple miasm state and have removed the pathology. So in this way, what have we done? We have identified the miasmatic state, which is the primary state, and we have removed the pathology. This in turn has uncovered the cause and we remove all suffering, which is known as disease. So by this method, the cause of the miasm will be uncovered and all the suffering of the disease will be removed. The law governing the life and disease corresponds to our therapeutic law. So the law governing life and disease corresponds to the therapeutic law also. Thus, they work in harmony, each one having an agreement with the other. So the law of life, the law of disease, the law of therapeutics, all of them, they work in harmony with each other. Then only the cure will take place. That's all, folks. And I think so I've covered up most of the chapters which are there for upcoming examination. And I hope you will like my video. If you like it, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe to my channel.